Somewhere in a monastery library, protected for over 1,000 years by monks who copied it letter by letter in a language almost no one outside their walls could read, sat a book the rest of the world had been told to forget. It claimed to describe things human eyes were never supposed to see: storehouses hidden behind the sky, chambers where the dead wait in silence, beings who broke a law older than mankind itself and paid for it with chains of darkness. For centuries, most of the Western world assumed this book was lost forever, a rumor mentioned in old footnotes and half-forgotten sermons. Then it turned up again, carried out of Ethiopia in the 18th century, and later confirmed by fragments buried in the caves of the Dead Sea for 2,000 years. This is the story of the Book of Enoch, and what it claims lies just beyond the edge of what we are allowed to see. To understand why this text carries such weight, you first need to understand who Enoch was supposed to be. In the book of Genesis, Enoch appears for only a handful of verses. He is listed in the genealogy stretching from Adam to Noah, described as the father of Methuselah and the great-grandfather of Noah himself. Genesis says Enoch walked with God for 365 years, and then simply states that he was no more because God took him. He is one of only 2 men in the entire Hebrew Bible said to have left the world without dying, the other being the prophet Elijah. That single, strange detail was enough to fuel centuries of speculation. If Enoch never died, where did he go, and what did he see there? The text that bears his name claims to answer exactly that question, framing itself as the record Enoch supposedly left behind for his son Methuselah and for future generations, describing everything he witnessed during his time in the presence of heavenly beings before he was ultimately taken from the earth for good. The Book of Enoch is not actually one single book. It is a collection of 5 separate compositions, written by different authors at different times, later bound together into what scholars now call First Enoch, or the Ethiopic Enoch, to distinguish it from other unrelated texts that later took on Enoch's name. These 5 sections are known as the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. Most scholars date the oldest of these sections, the Astronomical Book and the Book of the Watchers, to somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, making parts of this text older than most of what we now call the New Testament, and roughly contemporary with the final editing of the Hebrew Bible itself. The Book of Parables is generally considered the youngest section, possibly composed sometime around the turn of the era. For a very long time, the only surviving complete version of this text existed in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is the only major Christian body in the world that considers the Book of Enoch fully canonical scripture. And it was Ethiopian monks who preserved the entire work intact while it vanished almost everywhere else. Small quotations and references to Enoch's writings survived in Greek and Aramaic fragments scattered across the ancient world, and early Christian writers like Tertullian in the 2nd century clearly knew the text and treated it with real respect. But the complete book itself disappeared from European awareness for well over 1,000 years. The word watcher itself, in the original Aramaic, is ir, meaning one who is awake or one who keeps vigil, a title that appears elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible in the book of Daniel, where similar heavenly beings called watchers are described observing events from the divine council. This detail matters because it shows that the concept of watching angels was not an invention unique to Enoch, but part of a broader vocabulary shared across Jewish apocalyptic writing in the centuries before and after the Babylonian exile, a period when Jewish thought was increasingly engaging with questions of cosmic order, divine justice, and the presence of intermediary beings operating between heaven and earth. That changed in 1773, when the Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 manuscript copies of the Book of Enoch written in Ge'ez. It took decades for scholars to translate the text properly, and it was not until 1821 that the first English translation appeared, produced by Richard Lawrence. Even then, many scholars treated the book with suspicion, uncertain whether the Ethiopian manuscripts represented an authentic ancient text, or a much later invention dressed up in old language, since Ge'ez itself only developed as a written language centuries after the events the text describes, leaving open the question of exactly how much translation and transmission stood between the original composition and the copies Bruce carried home. That uncertainty was finally resolved in the 20th century, in the caves overlooking the Dead Sea. Between 1947 and the following decade, archaeologists uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, and among the thousands of fragments were pieces of the Book of Enoch written in Aramaic, the actual language many scholars believe the original text was composed in. These fragments, some dating back to the 2nd century BCE, proved that the book was genuinely ancient, and that the community at Qumran valued it enough to copy it repeatedly. In fact, more copies of Enoch were found at Qumran than copies of several books that did make it into the standard Hebrew Bible, which tells you how influential this text once was among certain Jewish communities before it was eventually excluded from the canon. The scholar most responsible for piecing together these Aramaic fragments was Joseph Milik, who spent years reconstructing the scattered pieces recovered from Cave 4 at Qumran and published his findings in 1976, confirming that 4 of the 5 sections of Enoch existed in Aramaic form centuries before the birth of Christ. Interestingly, no fragments of the Book of Parables, the second section of the collected work, were found among the Qumran material at all, which has led many scholars to conclude that this particular section was composed later than the rest, possibly sometime in the 1st century BCE, or even the 1st century CE, and by a different author or community than the one responsible for the earlier material. This matters historically because the Book of Parables contains some of the most theologically loaded language in the entire collection, introducing a heavenly figure called the Son of Man, seated on a throne of glory, who judges kings and the mighty and reveals hidden things to the righteous. Many scholars view this figure as a significant conceptual bridge between earlier Jewish ideas of a coming judge and the later title used throughout the Christian Gospels, where Jesus repeatedly refers to himself as the Son of Man, though the exact relationship between the two remains a subject of ongoing academic debate rather than settled fact. The heart of the book, and the part that has captured imaginations for centuries, is the opening section known as the Book of the Watchers. It expands dramatically on a single, strange passage from Genesis chapter 6, which briefly mentions that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, found them beautiful, and took wives from among them, producing offspring described only as the Nephilim, translated in some versions as giants or fallen ones. Genesis gives this event only a few sentences before moving on to the story of Noah and the flood. The Book of Enoch takes that fragment and turns it into a full narrative. According to the text, a group of 200 angels, called Watchers, because they had been assigned to observe humanity from the heavens, became fixated on human women. Led by a figure named Shemihaza, they descended to the summit of Mount Hermon and swore a mutual oath, binding themselves together with a curse if any of them backed out, before proceeding to break the boundary they had been set to guard. The text even offers its own explanation for the mountain's name, claiming that Hermon was so called because it was the site where the Watchers bound themselves by oath and curse, a piece of wordplay connecting the Hebrew root for a ban or curse to the mountain where the rebellion supposedly began. Mount Hermon sits on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria, a real physically identifiable location, which gave the ancient audience of this text a concrete geographical anchor for what might otherwise have sounded like a purely mythical event, blending the cosmic scale of the story with the familiar landscape of the region its earliest readers actually lived in. What follows in the text is described as a catastrophic transfer of knowledge. The Watchers did not just take human wives, according to the story. They also began teaching humanity things the text presents as forbidden. One Watcher named Azazel is singled out for teaching men how to forge weapons of war, swords, and shields, and the metallurgy needed to make them, transforming human conflict from something fought with sticks and stones into something fought with iron. Azazel is also credited with teaching women the art of cosmetics, the use of precious stones, dyes, and adornment, framed in the text not as harmless vanity, but as a tool that fed human corruption. Other Watchers are named as teachers of specific forbidden arts. One taught the cutting of roots and the use of plants for medicine and poison alike. Another taught the interpretation of clouds and weather signs. Another taught astrology and the reading of the stars. And another taught the signs of the sun and moon, essentially divination through celestial movement. The text presents all of this instruction, even the parts that sound like basic technological or scientific progress to modern ears, as a violation. The underlying idea is not that knowledge itself is evil, but that this particular knowledge was meant to remain outside human hands, at least for now, and that its early arrival corrupted rather than elevated human civilization. The offspring of the Watchers and human women are described as giants of enormous size and appetite, and the text says their hunger eventually could not be satisfied by ordinary food. According to the narrative, they turned on humanity itself, and violence spread across the earth. The cries of the earth and its inhabitants, the text says, rose up to heaven, and the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, hearing this suffering, brought the matter before God. What follows is one of the most vivid passages in the entire book. God commands Raphael to bind Azazel, wrap him in darkness, and cast him into a pit in the desert until Judgment Day. God commands Michael to bind Shemihaza and the rest of the fallen Watchers for 70 generations, imprisoning them beneath the earth until the final judgment, while their monstrous offspring are set against one another to destroy each other in endless warfare. This is also where the text ties directly back into Genesis, presenting the flood of Noah not simply as a punishment for generic human wickedness, but specifically as a divine reset triggered by the Watchers' transgression and the chaos their offspring unleashed on the earth. This is where the title of this video finds its real foundation, because the Book of Enoch does not stop at describing hidden events on earth. A large portion of the text is dedicated to describing what Enoch himself supposedly witnessed when he was taken on guided tours through realms ordinarily closed off from human perception. In the astronomical book, Enoch is led by the angel Uriel and shown the mechanics of the sun, the moon, and the stars, described through the lens of an ancient Near Eastern cosmology, where the sky operates like a structure with gates, 12 gates for the sun and 12 for the moon, through which these bodies rise and set according to a fixed calendar. The text goes into remarkable technical detail for its time, describing a 364-day solar calendar and specific rules for how the moon's light waxes and wanes as it moves through its gates. Modern scholars view this astronomical section as one of the earliest surviving attempts at systematic calendrical science within Jewish tradition, reflecting genuine astronomical observation, filtered through a theological framework, rather than literal modern astronomy. Beyond the mechanics of sun and moon, Enoch describes being shown what the text calls the storehouses, chambers hidden at the far edges of the earth, where natural phenomena are kept before being released into the world. He describes storehouses for the winds, for snow, for hail, for dew, and for the clouds, each guarded and released according to divine command, rather than what we would now describe as natural, unregulated weather systems. To a modern reader, this sounds like poetic imagery, but within the ancient worldview the text was written in, these were treated as literal architectural features of the cosmos, an unseen infrastructure operating behind the visible sky. Enoch also describes traveling to the ends of the earth, where he sees the pillars that the text says hold up the heavens, and the foundations upon which the earth itself rests, again reflecting the flat, layered cosmology common to nearly all ancient Near Eastern cultures at the time, including much of the wider imagery found elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Perhaps the most striking section of Enoch's cosmic tour concerns the fate of the dead. Guided by the angel Raphael, Enoch is shown a mountain in the west containing 4 hollow places, described as holding chambers for the spirits of the dead, separated according to how each person lived. One chamber holds the righteous, bright and filled with a spring of water, where the souls wait peacefully for judgment. Another holds sinners who were never punished for their crimes during their lifetime, kept apart in torment as they await final justice. A third is reserved specifically for those who suffered violent death, their spirits crying out for justice against those who wronged them. This vision of a divided, compartmentalized afterlife for spirits waiting on further judgment predates and closely parallels concepts that would later appear in later Jewish and Christian ideas about Sheol, Hades, and the intermediate state of the dead. And many scholars consider this section of Enoch to be a significant direct influence on how later apocalyptic Jewish and early Christian writers imagined the architecture of the afterlife. Beyond the Book of the Watchers and the astronomical book, the remaining sections of the collection round out its picture of hidden history and coming judgment. The Book of Dream Visions retells the entire span of human history, from Adam through the flood, and up to the author's own era, as an allegory acted out entirely by animals, where humans are portrayed as cattle and sheep, righteous figures like Noah appear as white bulls, and oppressive foreign empires are represented as predatory birds and beasts tearing at the flock. This section, often called the animal apocalypse by scholars, culminates in a vision of a great white bull, widely interpreted as a symbolic messianic figure, appearing at the end of days to usher in a transformed and restored world. The final section, the Epistle of Enoch, shifts tone entirely, moving away from vision and allegory into direct moral instruction, pronouncing a series of woes against the wealthy and powerful who built their fortunes through oppression and injustice, and offering reassurance to the poor and righteous that a final reckoning is coming even if it has not arrived yet. Taken together, these 5 sections show that the Book of Enoch was never a single, static composition, but a growing body of literature, expanded and reshaped by different hands across roughly 3 centuries, unified mainly by its shared conviction that history has a hidden structure only occasionally glimpsed by the righteous few. The idea embedded in the video's title, that human eyes were blocked from certain things, reflects the actual internal logic of the text itself. Enoch repeatedly frames his visions as secrets, mysteries revealed to him specifically because he was righteous and chosen, information withheld from the rest of humanity under normal circumstances. The text presents the physical world people can see, the ground beneath their feet, and the sky above their heads, as only the surface layer of a much larger structured cosmos operating according to rules, boundaries, and hidden mechanisms that ordinary human senses were never built to perceive. This is a common theme across apocalyptic literature broadly, a genre name that literally comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, meaning an unveiling or a revealing of hidden things. Enoch stands as one of the earliest and most fully developed examples of this genre, predating the more famous apocalyptic writings later collected in the Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation, both of which scholars believe were shaped, at least in part, by the same tradition of visionary literature that produced the Book of Enoch. Despite its early popularity, the Book of Enoch was gradually pushed to the margins of both Jewish and Christian tradition. As Rabbinic Judaism solidified its canon in the centuries following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, texts associated with angelology, apocalyptic speculation, and claims of secret revelation fell out of favor, and Enoch was left out of the Hebrew Bible entirely. Early Christianity had a more complicated relationship with the text. Several early church fathers, including Tertullian, cited Enoch approvingly, and the concept of fallen angels described in the Book of the Watchers clearly shaped early Christian ideas about the origin of demons and the nature of Satan's rebellion. Most significantly, the New Testament Epistle of Jude directly quotes the Book of Enoch by name, attributing a specific prophecy about God coming with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment directly to Enoch, the seventh from Adam. This is one of the clearest, most explicit citations of a non-canonical text found anywhere in the New Testament, and it is precisely why later Christian authorities struggled with what to do about the book. If Jude quoted it as legitimate prophecy, some early readers reasoned, how could the book itself be dismissed as false? Despite this, by the 4th and 5th centuries, as church councils worked to formalize an official biblical canon, the Book of Enoch was left out of both the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions, and it eventually faded from mainstream circulation almost everywhere except Ethiopia, where the Tewahedo Church continued to treat it as scripture without interruption. It's important, in telling this story accurately, to separate what is historically documented from what remains theological claim or literary tradition. The existence of the Book of Enoch, its ancient origins, its discovery in Ethiopia, its confirmation among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and its citation in the Epistle of Jude are all well-established historical facts, verified through manuscript evidence and academic scholarship. What the book describes, the Watchers, the storehouses of weather, the divided chambers of the dead, the cosmic architecture of gates and pillars, are the claims and visionary imagery of the text itself, understood by scholars as reflecting the cosmology, theology, and moral concerns of the Jewish communities who wrote and preserved it during the Second Temple period. Whether one reads these passages as literal descriptions of a hidden spiritual reality, as symbolic moral and theological teaching, or as a fascinating artifact of how ancient people tried to make sense of the natural world and the problem of evil, depends entirely on the lens the reader brings to it. It is also worth noting that even within the Second Temple period itself, not every Jewish community treated this material the same way. Groups like the one at Qumran, who saw themselves as a righteous remnant living apart from a corrupt world, clearly embraced Enoch's vision of hidden cosmic order and coming judgment as reinforcing their own worldview, while other strands of Jewish thought that would eventually shape Rabbinic Judaism grew increasingly wary of literature that claimed direct visionary access to secrets beyond Scripture, favoring instead a tradition centered on law, interpretation, and the authority of Moses. This tension between visionary revelation and established textual authority is part of why Enoch's popularity rose and fell so dramatically across different eras and communities, rather than following one single, uninterrupted path of acceptance or rejection. What is not up for debate is the book's genuine historical significance. It shaped how an entire tradition of Jewish and early Christian thought imagined angels, demons, cosmic order, and the afterlife, influencing texts and ideas that rippled forward for 2,000 years, even after the book itself was formally excluded from most official scripture. In recent decades, the Book of Enoch has found a strange kind of second life, drawing attention not just from religious scholars and historians, but from a much broader public curious about ancient mysteries, hidden knowledge, and alternative interpretations of biblical history. Some read it as an early record of extraterrestrial contact, interpreting the Watchers as visitors from beyond the earth rather than angelic beings, a reading that stretches well beyond what mainstream biblical scholarship supports, but one that speaks to how deeply this ancient text still resonates with modern questions about hidden forces shaping human history. The book has also found its way into popular fiction, television, and film, frequently referenced or loosely adapted in stories dealing with fallen angels, ancient conspiracies, and forbidden knowledge, and it continues to be one of the most searched and discussed pieces of biblical apocrypha on the internet today, often generating far more public curiosity than many books that actually made it into the standard biblical canon. Others approach it more cautiously, as an invaluable window into how Jewish thinkers living under the shadow of empire, war, and uncertainty tried to explain suffering, moral corruption, and the persistence of evil in the world by locating its origin not purely in human choice, but in a primeval betrayal committed by beings who were supposed to protect humanity instead of exploiting it. It is also worth remembering just how much of a role sheer physical survival played in this story. Ancient texts vanish constantly through fire, through neglect. through the simple fact that parchment and papyrus decay, and through deliberate suppression by authorities who decided certain writings should no longer be copied. The Book of Enoch survived essentially by accident of geography, preserved in full only because one church in one region of the world kept treating it as sacred long after the rest of the Mediterranean world had stopped copying it. Had Ethiopian Christianity not maintained that unbroken tradition, and had the Dead Sea Scrolls never been hidden away in those clay jars 2,000 years ago, modern readers might know the Book of Enoch only as a handful of quotations preserved secondhand in the writings of other authors, a ghost of a text rather than the fully reconstructed work scholars can study today. That fact alone should change how we think about the ancient world, since it means an unknown number of other texts, other visions, and other claims about hidden knowledge from that same era were almost certainly lost forever, their contents never recovered, their questions never answered. What makes the Book of Enoch endure, whatever position you take on its literal claims, is the boldness of its central idea. It insists that the visible world is not the whole world, that behind the sky, people see every day, there are gates and storehouses and chambers operating on rules no ordinary eye was built to perceive. That the knowledge shaping human civilization, from metalworking to medicine to the reading of the stars, arrived under circumstances the text itself treats as morally complicated rather than simply good. And that somewhere beneath the ground, according to the ancient author, entities who once had the power to guide humanity are instead waiting, bound, for a judgment that has not yet come. Nearly 2,500 years after it was written, in a language most of the modern world had forgotten, buried in monasteries and desert caves, the Book of Enoch still asks the same unsettling question it always did. What if there is more happening around us than we were ever meant to see? If this journey into one of history's most mysterious ancient texts fascinated you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next deep dive into the hidden corners of history, mythology, and the ancient world. Leave a comment below and let us know which part of the Book of Enoch surprised you the most, whether it was the Watchers, the storehouses of the sky, or the divided chambers of the dead. Give this video a like if you want more content like this, and share it with someone who loves uncovering the stories buried beneath the surface of what we think we already know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.